So let's start our panel today as far as introductions go. And Jaylene, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Thank you. I'm Jaylene Groniger. I'm in the Boise Treasure Valley market. I am out of the Eagle office. I got my license in 2011 in California, but I've been doing real estate here since 2014 in the Treasure Valley.
Awesome. Thank you. Jared.
Yeah, I'm Coldwell Banker Tomlinson here in Meridian office in the Treasure Valley as well as Jaylene, and I've been in the industry 18 years, licensed for almost 17.
Awesome. Awesome. Welcome. Shane Delaney.
Coldwell Banker Tomlinson South, and my Idaho license hangs in the Meridian office. I've been licensed in Washington, Idaho for 28 years.
Yeah, just a kid. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So look, you have no, how do you have no gray in your beard?
A little bit.
You're using product, aren't you?
Just for men.
You're using, absolutely. Yeah, mine comes in, I look like Papa Smurf with a beard.
Yeah, right.
Worst. Awesome. So thank you, Shane. Luke.
Hi guys, I'm Luke Mishke, Coldwell Banker Tomlinson in the North office in Spokane, and I have been licensed. It's my 3-year anniversary actually next month.
Yeah, the young gun, as it were. Awesome.
Yes.
Welcome. And Julie.
I am Julie Chavez. I'm with Coldwell Banker Tomlinson in the Tri-Cities. And I was trying to add up how many years I've been in real estate. I think it's a solid 6 years. I think I'm starting my 7th year.
Excellent.
So yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you for participating. So let's dig into it. So today, oh yeah, there's my slide with all the people. That'd probably be good to have that on while you're introducing yourselves. So today, if you do have questions while we're going and you want to type it in the chat or the Q&A section, we'll make sure between Michelle, Jessica, and myself, we'll make sure that those get answered. And then I can bring you in. If it's something you want to ask live, just let us know, and then I can promote you to a panelist for a second so you can talk to the folks. And we'll, try to have a very organic conversation around these issues. And let's start it off. So we'll start off with Jared. So in your marketplace, what segments of the market have seen the most change?
Well, in any kind of a downturn, all markets get hit. So it's across the board. I looked today, we had price reductions the last 24 hours of 60 homes between 330 and 2+ million. So, it hits everybody. And I know we're going to talk about this later about, seller expectations, or it might be a little bit high. So, but the buyer pool in the higher end is a lot smaller. So they take a little bit bigger of a hit. They're going to have more days on market. And, the lower end, although they have a price drop, they have a bigger buyer pool right now. So they may not have to do the same exact percentage of price drop as the higher end will have to do. And they won't be on the market as long. But every segment's taking a hit. Yeah. That's, in some point. So. Yeah.
And I know we have different marketplaces. So Julie, so you guys can fill in here. What do you see in your guys' market in Tri-Cities?
So the Tri-Cities market is really, really interesting. So obviously the prices, everything, there's been appreciation everywhere, but we've really been affected is from this August to last August. When you look at the price ranges, so between the 200 and 250,000, I mean, there's just not much inventory at all. But it's an 86% decrease in sales from what we were seeing then. And then as you get into like the 250 to 300 range, you're still seeing numbers up in like 69%. But what's really interesting is here, the higher end market is doing really well. That market has not been affected at all. In fact, we've seen a 200% increase in sales for properties at 800,000 and up from last August to this August.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. So they're obviously not as rate sensitive at that higher level, which might indicate just either a significant amount of equity or cash that they're re-leveraging into the marketplace. That's super interesting. How about what are we seeing in Spokane? Who wants to take that one?
I'll take it.
Okay.
So I think we're seeing a lot of what Boise is seeing too, but what I'm doing on my listings, I take a lot of pride in pricing. I always have. And in this hot market, you could kind of just throw whatever price on a house, seemed like. Now, for instance, I just had one that should have been probably last year about $1.1 million. And I had this conversation with a seller that we listed at 950 and they were happy with that number. And we ended up getting 75 over list. So I think if you're pricing them correctly in the market, you can still get over list. And the last 3 I priced around 900 have sold well over list. But last year I probably could have put that $1 million tag on them. So I think a lot of agents are struggling with that right now. You know, their sellers are driving the bus on, hey, I want this price. But if you show them the data and really push that side of it, I think you can get them to see your way.
Sure. And the demand curve is still strong enough out there where you're seeing like that, you're still causing that kind of frenzy, as it were, even if it's 2 or 3 offers versus 20 or whatever. But
Yes.
but yeah, interesting. Luke?
Yeah, I I agree with Shane completely. I have been taking as much pride as I can in pricing and putting in as much work as possible. And we just had a few listings that we went in and priced them after a lot of research, and both in the 335 price range, we ended up at 370, and at 339, we ended up at like 358.
Wow.
And I just think it speaks to if you still bring that appropriate price in, there's still going to be a good demand.
Right. Interesting. Jaylene, do you have anything to add on to the Boise market?
Yeah, I'm seeing the same thing all of you are. I have had situations though where we have come in, I've listed under market value at the time and still struggled with days on market and had to do several price drops to even get further down, even though we started below market. And I was very surprised. And actually, so were all the agents that I dealt with, to be honest. I'd get phone calls from agents going, I can't believe this is still on the market at this price. And it's just, I think it's the certain markets though. I think Luke addressed this earlier, that there's a market, a big buyer market, Julie mentioned it, in the over $1 million. It seems like that market is going pretty well, but if it's like in that mid range, that, you know, 5 to 800,000, I feel like those really struggle and still price drop.
Interesting.
And Eric, to speak to the aspect of negotiating, being a part of that, I think the expectations, the negotiation with your seller initially at that first seller's meeting and having that data and explaining to your sellers what's going on in the market and having the data, the information to back it up, and testimony to back it up, helps set that expectation so that you're able to price that home appropriately. But if we come in unprepared and we're not explaining them that market situation, that's where we can get into the sellers with maybe the realistic, they've got the market in mind from 9 months ago.
Right.
And now you're an agent struggling. You want the
You're
listing.
on the defense. Yeah, you're defensive.
Yeah, you're on the
right?
defense.
Yeah.
You want the listing and they want to make a ton of money. And now you're getting the listing and you're coming on too high on the market, and then it's not performing for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I always mess with sellers and they're like, well, let's try this. And I'm like, hey, I have an idea. Let's ask $1 million, because think how much money you'll make then. Right. It's like, there's a marketplace for this, you guys. It's not just something you just randomly do. Shane, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think July and August were not good indicators of the market. You know, we had such a wet spring all throughout. I think Idaho was the same way. And I also noticed that, you know, every flight around the country was full. People were taking vacations that they didn't take during COVID. And what I've noticed, and that's what I've said to my sellers, I said, I don't think we should gauge the market off of those 2 months. We need to look at this fall and really decide where the market's headed, because I don't think that was a good indicator, because I saw homes in July that sat and now they're all selling. So I think that was just a tough time period.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a Q&A, well, for you, Shane. It was how long were your 900 plus on the market?
5 days or less.
Really? Yeah. So it was just like bam, right out of the gate.
And I'm always in constant communication with other brokers that are showing it. So I'm always working the deal, whichever way I can get it to go. So
Sure. Cool. Larry has a question. Let me see if that, Larry, let me see if we're going to answer that in a second here. I think this would be a good one well, let's do this question. And then Larry, I'm going to address your question in the Q&A. So Jillian, do you want to start us off on how has your buyers and sellers perceptions of the market changed and how are you addressing it?
Well, so the seller's perception hasn't changed. We've had to, as agents, get them to that change by letting them know that, yes, they are having to list their home lower than they expected because their market, in some cases, their home prices have doubled in 3 years. And especially in Idaho, that just doesn't happen. We see a 5% appreciation in a 1-year period historically, but getting the sellers to change that perception has been, I think, all agents' greatest jobs this year. And I totally agree that the July and August market, actually June, part of June too, I think everybody's going off on vacations. So I did have that conversation with all of my listing clients at that time too, that people on vacation, so expect your homes to be on the market. We're not going to sell in 2 weeks. It's going to take, average 30 to 45 days if we list it properly.
Yeah.
And getting them to understand that, hey, I've had this conversation with several of my clients. You bought your home at 350,000 3 years ago, and now you're wanting to sell it at 750,000. You're not going to get the 750. 650 is still a great return on your investment for that home. And that has been, I think, the biggest thing. And then the buyers, for the buyers' perceptions, they realize, I'm not even having to tell them, they are realizing that they can take their time. They don't have to make a rash decision. They don't have to waive appraisal. They don't have to waive inspection. They can come in and negotiate on the home purchase price. And I think that most buyers are actually realizing that by the time we're connecting. I did have quite a few buyers that dropped out of the buyer's market. I had 11 buyers in February, and by April 1st, every one of them had said, we're going to wait.
Right.
A couple have come back, but that was the reality.
I'm gonna wait for interest rates to go higher, because then that'll be better, right? Like, hello, right? 1%, 10% rule. Are you, for those buyers who have not come back on to the marketplace, are you still providing them with any sort of information as teasers?
Oh yes, on a regular basis. Yep, every 3 to 4 weeks, I'm touching back to them, letting them know, and I'm keeping an eye open for homes that fit what they were looking for, and saying, hey, just want to show you this home. This home's still on the market, and it's one that you liked, and it's not selling. If you're interested,
negotiate.
And a lot of it, there's several California buyers in that mix. And the California market has been very significantly impacted in certain areas like the Bay Area. And so now they're like reluctant to sell because their market isn't moving the way that it was, and they aren't getting the value out of their home.
You're going to lose money on their house, right?
That's right. I know.
Interesting, isn't it? And that's where being able to show that rate of return, like, okay, well, you bought it for this, you're selling it for this, you lived there, and you had a 20% return. I'm having a trouble feeling sorry.
Or greater.
Right?
Or greater.
Right. Yeah, totally. And it's what's interesting too, the one thing you mentioned, and I'm going to release it to the other, or ask the other folks, but we're kind of in a traditional market, at least in the marketplaces we are all in. Typically summer kind of slows down, right? Typically our spring and falls are kind of the busy parts, because we're like a lot of other animals, right? We come out of our little caves from the winter months, from hibernation and we get busy and do stuff. And then we see winter coming, we get busy and do stuff. And so that's more of it in line of a traditional kind of marketplace, which we just haven't seen for years, I feel like.
Right.
And so does anybody have any additional thoughts around this as far as kind of buyers and sellers perceptions? Or did Jaylene do such a thorough job? Yeah, go ahead, Luke.
I think like when I'm meeting with buyers, similar to her, I had, you know, this overflow of buyers where you were funneling 6 or 7 buyers consistently, it felt like, and then it just dropped off. And then as you're having conversations with them and they're coming back and you're talking about, well, if we look at my buyers over the last year who were putting additional down payment money down and potentially overspending, if you want to think of it as that or not, depending on how you go.
Sure.
With the interest rate rise and the prices coming down, it's just having that conversation where it's like, at the end of the day, is this a better situation for you? Does this make sense for you? And really taking care of your buyers and not letting them get worked up on, okay, it's a 5% interest rate. This means it's a bad purchase. It's like, well, what's your current living situation? What's your current financial situation? Let's not get just worked up and caught in the weeds of the hearsay. And let's really look at it, because that house that you'd like to buy at 500,000, 9 months ago would probably have 10 offers, maybe sell for 550, and they're going to ask you to waive inspection and risk $20,000 on a low appraisal. And so just maintaining that perspective for people and educating those buyers, there's a lot of people that think that right now might be one of the best times to buy. It's just on how you look at it.
Right. And what are we seeing on that note? Are you guys seeing rents go down?
No,
Not yet.
I don't
No.
think I've seen them go down. And so the risk of, your rents going up is far greater right now, probably, than overpaying for a single family home if you can get in that, in that payment relatively the same. So other comments on this question?
Yeah, I agree with Luke on that. I do the same thing. I break down what they would pay in rent over the next 2 years. And I usually sit first-time home buyers down and explain all that and go, so even if the market dropped 5% and you're going to stay there 5 years, I mean, you're really not going to lose anything. It's like anything else. The stock market in 08, if you sold everything, you lost money. If you didn't, you made money by, 2018, 19. And I think, again, it's such a personal decision on where you are in your life and that need to own a home. And my buyers haven't dropped out because I do a good job of, breaking that down for them.
Right. And yeah, like, you're going to throw your money away on rent for the next 2 years. What does that look like? And you have there's no potential for upside on that, right?
Yeah.
That's what I think somebody in another panel said this, like, that's 100% interest rate.
yeah.
So you want to pay 5% interest rate or 100% interest rate?
Eric, I think something to consider too, us in the industry, we're always talking to other real estate agents, appraisers, lenders, people who are in the process. But I remember when I bought my first home, so separated from the real estate market, just a kid who wanted to buy a house.
Mhm.
The idea being was home ownership, pride of ownership, a place to call my own. Like, I wanted a house. And so people are willing to buy houses, and
Sure.
if it's within their means. And so remember, clients out there want to buy houses. Don't you tell them it's a bad market. Don't you tell them, you shouldn't buy. And I think
Absolutely.
sometimes we can create a narrative within our offices that we can become a little bit negative and go into those meetings with buyers going, and thinking that they're going to have all these objections that they don't even have.
Yeah, because they're clueless. Yeah.
Right.
And
They don't know.
Our attitude is projected, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, should we really
Right.
do this?
Yeah. You almost talked them out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Any other additional thoughts on this one? Okay. So Q&A, I have one Q&A. It says, in doing your research on pricing, have you changed your method? As a follow-up, do you look at different types of data than you would have last year? Is anybody going to take that one on? Go ahead, Shane.
So I've built really good relationships with appraisers in Spokane. One of the things I've always done and learned early on was when an appraiser calls me for information on a listing, I call them back within 10, 15 minutes or email them. So I call a lot of appraisers. When I have a tough home, I'll get like a 2-bedroom, 1-bath in a neighborhood that has nothing to support it, value wise.
Right.
And I'll ask them, what would you do in this situation? Where would you go for your comps? And what would you look at? Would you look at a 2-2 or a 3-1 as far as bedrooms, baths? And they'll give me that information. So, as far as that goes, I've always got that information at my disposal so I can help them decide.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love those questions too. Like, hey, how would you comp this? Would you adjust for a bathroom or a bedroom? What's easier? And get their guidance, because your information is going to have to dovetail with theirs. How about anybody else? Have you changed your methodology or the kind of data you're looking at substantially?
I think looking at, am I on?
Yeah, go ahead. We'll go Luke and then Jalen. Yes.
Sorry, I can't see the rest of the panel. I can't tell if I'm interrupted.
No, it's all good.
But I think looking at the pendings is really important right now, and making a phone call. When we priced these last 2 houses, we called a lot of the pendings list agents and asked them how many showings, how many offers, and whatnot. And I think it's a time to concentrate on what's going pending and not so much active. And even sold is tough because we saw such a drastic change, I think, in Spokane, where something that closed May 9th, went under contract at sometime in April. I mean, it's so different. You go, okay, well, that was just 2 months ago, but we really saw a lot of change.
Yeah, absolutely. Jaylene?
Yeah, I've had this experience in the last 45 days. I had 5 active listings and they weren't moving. And so I was having to look and see what's going pending, calling the agents and saying, hey, what did you have any extra buyers? What was the interest? How did it go? How are they still, is the contract moving forward? Asking those questions. And I got to the point where I did go, what's active? And I looked for every single one of my listings, what's active, how long they've been on the market, have any of them pended that were direct competitive properties. And I went below their active list price to get my properties under contract. So I didn't even care what was sold or pending.
Right.
I went and said,
Just
okay, we've got 16 actives in your market. This is the cheapest one, and this is the most expensive. You need to get in the top 3 or 4 of the least expensive homes in order to sell, because there just aren't enough pending in your market. And so you have to be the most competitive listing to sell.
Yeah.
And every single one of them, that's what they did. And they all got under contract within a couple of days.
Yeah. Jared?
Yeah, so it's also important if you after you do list it to be on top of what is going pending and you're not. So that's very important to see like properties that are going pending. And then, what Luke and Shannon said about calling those agents and did you get what you wanted, blah, blah, blah. So you can then present that information to your client, say these 3 houses that, were, slightly below you in pricing that are very similar went pending when it could have been even a buyer that looked at your home. So, you just have to know it's so real time right now.
Yes.
It's so instantaneous on how quickly the market changes that you have to be looking constantly at what's going pending and where you're sitting compared to those.
Yeah. Julie, did you have something?
Whenever you're doing market analysis, that is like my jam. I love doing market analysis. And I think a big part of it when you're actually talking to your potential client or the seller is, you have to explain to them why you're looking at the data that you're looking at, right? I mean, you have to explain, hey, we need to look at the actives because this is going to be our active competition. We need to look at pendings because we need to see what somebody was willing to make an offer on. We may not know what that offer was, but if we see that it was on the market for 60 days, we can assume it probably had a price reduction. If it went under contract in 2 days, we can assume it either went at, at the asking price or potentially higher. And then you want to look at what has sold, because even though the market is shifting and it's shifting very quickly, you can still gather a lot of information, especially now that, we've gone through a couple of interest rate increases and you're starting to get a better idea of, what that's looking like. So I would say in terms of, if anything is changing, I think it's just continuing to communicate really well. And then also in areas where I've had listings that have been on the market for a little bit longer than I would have liked, it's picking up the phone and calling all those other agents whose listings have gone pending and asking them, what kind of feedback did you get? Why weren't you getting offers, but maybe what did you change to get the offers?
Absolutely. Yeah, I love all of what you guys just said, because it's what I teach exactly. Like, call pendings, call actives, get feedback that you can relay to that seller so they can make a good decision, right? You're not trying to make the decision for them, but presenting that information. And I love, Julie, that you said, tell the why behind the data, right? Not just here's data, figure it out. It's like, this is why this is important. This is why it's relevant to you. This is why we need to take into consideration. And I love that. So thank you for that feedback. I had something to, just a little kind of something that's fun to use if you're not using it. I pull up the history reports on all of my comps in Paragon, because then it shows if they've gone out, price reduce and come off the market and come back on and all those things. And you can get a pretty accurate depiction of the benefits of overpricing, which is typically market time that it relates to. But so just a little tidbit there. So what has changed in your negotiation strategy and what has stayed the same? Shane. Oh, you're muted.
I just had one up in 9 Mile, and I pulled all the comps on it. Good agent on the other side, and I, studied it a lot and called her up. And before I wrote the offer, and just said, hey, it seems to me, I'm not trying to insult you, but it seems to me like you priced this kind of for April's market, April's comps. And she said, yeah, that's when I started talking to the seller, and that's when I presented the CMA. And I said, it seems like it was 485 and it should be around 460. And she goes, I agree with you. So that's what we wrote the offer at, and that's what we got assigned around at. But I also have been going at people a lot harder and saying, look, this is an all or nothing offer. We think it's a reasonable offer. We're not interested in a counter. And the last 2 or 3 I've gotten signed around that way with no counter at all. Because I think that some of the agents out there are scared in the market. And so are their sellers. So they're pushing them a little harder just to take the deal rather than counter it.
Sure.
So I'm seeing more of that on the negotiation side.
You're taking advantage of the buyer's leverage position, depending on.
And then on another one this week, it was started at 359. And I have a buyer. She moved here from Ukraine 2 years ago, married, 6-month-old baby, and they need costs paid. So we started looking at 20, 30, 40 days on the market rather than new listings, because we're getting beat out and we found a great house. It started at 359 and we got it for 310 with costs. And it's an estate, but they're just tickled that they got this deal together. So
yeah, no, that's awesome. I love all of that. Who else wants to take on this one? Jaylene?
I have one comment that I have found is working is negotiating buyer closing costs. That's kind of come back into the fold with helping buy down points. I'm seeing that that's been very successful, not just for my clients, but other agents in the industry. I'm seeing a lot more even in the marketing as far as negotiation, which we haven't seen in a while.
Yeah, no, absolutely. How about?
Can I say,
go ahead,
Shane
Luke.
just made me think of something, and I think we can all learn from that 9 Mile example where she started talking to him in April. And a lot of the times when we get those listings, our conversation starts and maybe it doesn't go on market for a month and a half later. But I've noticed it, in the past, you find out you're going to list a house, you have a price in mind. When you finally go to put it on market, you're like, whoa, it's 20 grand higher than I thought. And now it's almost the opposite.
Right.
And so I'm so big on testimonials, and I just think every agent should remember Shane's story, use that testimony the next time you go in to your preliminary listing appointment, and share that stuff with your clients and set that table for your sellers so they don't have to have that price reduction and you can hit that sweet spot. That's such gold.
Yeah. And, you know, that agent kind of screwed themselves, like, oh yeah, me too.
Right.
So,
but I forgot to tell my sellers.
And kudos to Shane for just being like, yeah, hey, if you're dumb enough to answer it, I'm like, that's on you. Because I if Shane would have called me with that, I'd be like, you know, Shane, I'll tell you what, we'll look at any offer, put me to work, you know, insult me, I dare you, and let's see what happens, right? Instead of being like, yeah, you're right, write it for 460, right? Like that's
yeah.
But because you don't know what the conversations are on the other side, and so you can't really be afraid. If I, you know, are any of you do any of you have buyers where you're looking at higher price range homes that you think you can cut by more than 3 to 5% at all?
Never.
Really?
No, it's just, I mean, maybe in this market for, you know, a brief period of time, but you just get their expectations too high of something that they can't afford.
Yep.
And so when they actually don't get them, and they have to go back to where they can afford it, it's not as good of a product. And so we've kind of teased them a little bit.
Sure.
And so that's why I don't do that.
Yeah, and I'd qualify that a little bit to where I'd say I don't know that I would just go out and show them expecting you can negotiate. I would have the conversation that Shane had and say, hey, are you guys, my person can afford up to this, is that even worth showing your home?
There you go. That's a good
Then-
before you get there.
Yeah, you don't want to like set them up for failure, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I have a comment on that. What I do is I always look a little bit higher, but I don't tell my client.
I do the same
actually
thing.
go look at the
Yeah, we all do.
history.
Yeah.
Yeah, go look at the history and say, oh, okay, there could be some negotiation room here.
Sure. Yeah.
Julie, how about you?
I feel like everybody's kind of hitting it right on there. In terms of other things that I would say have changed a little bit, somebody mentioned about, you know, looking at houses and higher price points. I think that there has been a natural, that has occurred naturally to a lot of buyers where they had been pre-approved for a higher amount and they had been looking at homes in a certain price point and were getting certain features. And then as the interest rates changed, they were having to look at something that maybe didn't have the same features. And so I think for a lot of people, you know, it was a little disheartening, but I think it was Shane that said it, you know, now though, as things are sitting on the market longer and people are pricing for what the market was back in April, you can go back to some of those houses and you really oftentimes can still help your clients get into something like that. But, you know, you've got to keep an eye on the market and make sure you're not offending people. But, you know, if a house is sitting on the market for a really long time, it's definitely worth a try.
Yes, absolutely. All right. So this kind of, we touched on this, Jaylene started to touch on this one. But what terms are we negotiating that we haven't been able to before? Luke?
Yeah. Like you said, it's kind of low hanging fruit, I guess. But obviously we're negotiating closing costs. Inspections are back on the table. So you have the whole opportunity to negotiate during your inspection contingency. Home sale contingencies are getting approved and becoming more of a regular appearance. Closing costs, rate buy downs. It was so disheartening when you're representing a buyer and you give them 20 minutes to look at a house and then you tell them that they have to waive inspection and they're not going to be able to fix anything and get any closing costs paid, you know. So it's pretty encouraging and cool to go out there and be able to have some really good winning situations for your buyers now. But there's all sorts. I mean, negotiations, your typical home buying negotiations are kind of all back on the table depending on the circumstances.
Are you leveraging some of that messaging back to the buyers who are kind of back on the fence where they're like,
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, when we're looking at houses, we can be a little more critical in just even when we're out there for showings and what we're looking at, and we can start getting the wheels turning as to, hey, how can we make this work for you guys? And what can we potentially leverage for you before we write the offer? Can I have a phone call with that listing agent, because we brought up A or B item that we saw when we viewed the house. And that conversation with the listing agent can happen before we even write an offer, and we can start kind of winning for our buyer.
Yeah. This is a fairly simple question. Does anybody have anything addition to that, like thoughts as far as other terms and things like that you're negotiating creatively?
I actually had one recently that was, in fact, we're still in the midst of that transaction. My client, the seller is, he's on a VA loan. And so the buyer was able to see that, and they are assuming his loan at a much lower interest rate than what they would be able to get right now. And that's something that I had never experienced before. So I would say that's probably a good tidbit to keep in mind if you do have a buyer and that there is, the home is a VA.
Right. And I think I think it's fair asking any of your listings, like, hey, is this loan assumable that we can advertise that? Because if it's a difference between 3% and 5% or 6%, that's a pretty good incentive. And typically people moving up have enough equity to kind of make up that delta. And so thank you for bringing that up. That's a great one. That because in academically, I expected that to start happening, but I had not heard of it actually happening. So that's awesome. That's awesome. Jared, did you have something?
No, I was just going to say, and we might touch on this later, but when you're negotiating like closing costs, just be very honest about if you're going in kind of high and you're asking for closing costs, just understand if the appraisal comes in low, there's going to be negotiations back on the table, so, the sellers are going to look at, I don't think sellers care about paying closing costs. They just look at what they net. So if you have to go above and beyond the purchase price to get those closing costs paid for, just understand appraisal is still coming in. So
yeah, absolutely. All right, let's go here. So excuse me. So Julie, this is our last question. What are the positive dynamics that you or your clients have experienced as they have acclimated to the higher interest rate environment?
So shockingly, there's actually a lot of them. Obviously, the not having to compete with 20 offers, or, you have more than 5 minutes to make a decision. So those are all things that have helped. Also, just even, in negotiating and the things that they're able to get. So, now the condition of the house is expected to be better. You can negotiate items when you're, when you're doing your inspection. You don't have to take the home as is. So those are all things that I think have been great for buyers. Also, those people that were sitting on the fence because they got disheartened because, they had all of these houses that they made offer after offer and they just weren't getting accepted. It's also had a really positive effect for a lot of those people, because if you can get them off the fence, they're a lot more likely to be able to get into something. Somebody was mentioning this in the conversation earlier today, a lot of times when you're talking to your buyers, you still have to explain, even if the situation isn't ideal, like if you're going to be renting versus, purchasing something. I encourage my clients, the ones that thought, gosh, last year I would have been able to afford a lot more, but this year I can't. Well, I remind them, okay, there's always that compromise. Yes, you may not be getting the same house that you wanted to get. On the bright side, what's that old saying, right? A home is like a bank account that you sleep in.
Mm-hmm.
So you can either give it all away, or, you can invest it in yourself. So I definitely think that there's been a lot of positives going into this market with the higher interest rates. And then just reminding your clients that you are purchasing the home, not the interest rate, because you can always refinance that interest rate.
Sure. No, absolutely. I love all that. Yeah. Anybody else want to add to that, some of the positive dynamics they've experienced?
Well, I think, just the market in general, prices are going down, so the interest rate going up isn't going to be as, you know, as hurt you as much as the market staying flat or still going up. So, and the inventory is going up, so you have more options as a buyer as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The offset to that, yeah, for sure. Jaylene?
I have, I'm in the older price range, older age group. So my clients in particular are all like, this is actually a good thing. Interest rates increasing. This isn't a negative in their minds. I don't do a lot of first-time home buyers. I do have had listings where there's been first-time home buyers involved. But I think overall, the people in the older generations are seeing the higher interest. They're not even seeing it at a high interest rate, because we were part of the ages where you pay 16% interest
Right.
on a home purchase back in the 60s and 70s. And so they're like, yeah, what's, 7%, that's nothing, I realize it's on a higher priced home, but we did need to see this economically speaking. And so I think that there's some kind of relief to some of the older generation that we have seen some interest rate hikes.
Yeah, I mean, I think for our financial market, for the bond market and things like that, it's very healthy, right? It's because what the thing that was keeping the interest rate so low was that injection, that artificial injection of currency into the bond market to keep those rates low by the Fed. And that's not a sustainable practice. And so I think overall, as people wrap their heads around it, and we see the market react the way it's reacting, and from the seller's standpoint, with pricing calming, negotiations back on the table, and buyers re-engaging because of that dynamic, that I think to date we're seeing, just as kind of a bellwether, we're seeing our volume off about 2 to 4%, depending on the marketplace overall, as far as written volume, and we're seeing our units down about 15%. So that's still indicative of those prices kind of hiking up, which is interesting. Cool, Shane.
Yeah, one thing along this line of interest rates, I've taken a lot more time the last month to meet with different lenders, because the last 6 months, they call you and you just don't have time to go have coffee with them or whatever. So, and I've found a lot more programs I was unaware of. So I have my favorite lenders like everybody else does, but I found another one now with an incredible arm that I've been funneling a lot of my buyers to, and they love it, the way it's set up. And it's somebody I wouldn't have used otherwise. So
yeah, so just being curious and getting out in front of different, because the loan products are there's a significant amount of different loan products out there.
Well, there's different
what was
lenders.
the loan you're talking about, just out of curiosity?
Gisa Credit Union right now has one of the best 5/1 arms out there, and I've sent a lot of people over, and they love it. The process is easy. We've gotten quick appraisals. They also have a 0 down conventional right now that I just got another buyer into.
0 down conventional?
Yes. Yeah. And that's so important to know those products, because I have buyers that are maybe on the fence, and when they hear about that, they're ready to go when they meet with the lender. So, well,
and like you say, taking that information, leveraging it back into those buyers who kind of like maybe peeled back or are on their heels a little bit, and say, by the way, here's a program, here's what it looks like financially if you bought this house that's still on the market that you can negotiate on, like, just boom, put it in front of them and make it a tangible thing, versus this, oh, sky is falling and the market's going to crash and there's a bubble, and because you still hear that kind of talk out there. It's maddening, because there's just zero really truth to it. Cool. Any other general points that you guys want to make that you haven't had a chance to yet on your negotiation strategies and messaging around it? We're kind of at the end. I don't have any Q&A in there. I think you guys did an amazing job at being very thorough and a lot of cool different angles, and good little anecdotal examples of how to deal with buyers and sellers in the marketplace. And so I really appreciate your guys' time today. Does anybody have anything to wrap up with?
Eric, can you hear me?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's so weird. Whenever usually you come on screen when you talk, but I can't see myself. It's tripping me out. I didn't know how much we would talk about just negotiating in general.
Okay.
So much of our business, the negotiating and what I call like the selling process happens agent to agent.
Mhm.
And so I wrote like these notes down. I thought I might share them if it was relevant. We didn't get to it, but
Sure.
I'd like
Yeah.
to share them
We
just
got
because I
time.
think,
Absolutely.
okay. I'm huge on word definitions and always just making sure I understand it. So I love to just look this kind of stuff up. But so often in real estate, you have a negotiation with one realtor who maybe comes to the table with their boxing gloves on versus a realtor who doesn't. And I
Mhm.
think it's important for everybody to always remember that negotiating and the definition of negotiating is two or more parties attempting to find common middle ground that benefits both sides. And so I've had the most success with my negotiations whenever I'm approaching whatever price, inspection, whatever that issue is. And my client that I'm representing always feels like they're winning. But when I'm speaking with that other agent, I'm kind and funny and listen to them. I'm asking good questions. And so I think it's important just to remind people you can win a lot of negotiations when it's win-win
It's collaborative.
on both sides. Yeah.
I love that. And that's absolutely the truth. It's really rare we're in a win-lose negotiation. Maybe with a bank or somebody who's not emotionally attached to the property or something like that, you can get away with that. But for the most part, it's that both parties have to agree to the end result and to get it closed. And there's at least for the buyers, if the buyers ever feel they're being treated unfairly or they're losing, they'll just cut bait and go to the next, and now they can go to another house, right?
Right.
They have that leverage to do that. And so but I think that's great. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And
One
it's-
other thing. Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
We'll
No,
go-
you're fine.
Go
Go ahead.
Luke and then Jared.
I was just going to say the other thing that I always encourage people to do is to be proactive and as proactive as you can. And we joke, this is stupid, but separation is in the preparation, right? And the more we can be proactive going into our negotiations, the smoother, the better it's going to be. The more information you have when you're negotiating the inspection contingency. I've gotten them so many times where they're asking for $5,000 and then a laundry list of items. And before I respond, I'll look up the values. I'll get my own quotes. I will double check all my pricing on what it would actually take to make and remedy the situation. And I shut down and win for my clients all the time because I prepared before I had my first conversation.
Yeah, and on that, yeah, I think quantifying the problem is a huge part of our job, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not just going to say, "Hey, Luke, put new gutters on," and then do the negative grade, and then do the railing or whatever. If I can attach a number to that, like here's bids to do that you can then show your seller, and they're like, "Oh, I thought that was going to be 10 grand. It's 3 grand. Yeah, that's no big deal."
Yeah.
That absolutely, yeah, Jared.
Yeah, so realtor to realtor speak, like kind of like Luke was talking about being positive during negotiations is, 10% of the agents do 90% of the business. And especially in a smaller market, you want to be the upstanding realtor and not burn bridges, because that could bite you, down the road with a different client where they won't show your house or they, and then people talk and it spreads like wildfire. If you just got to be the upstanding person and be positive and try to get the deal done, because if you're that kind of nasty guy, it'll hurt you down the road.
It'll hurt your clients.
Yeah,
right?
it'll hurt your clients and your next clients possibly. Yeah.
And I'm real curious to see how those bulldog listing agents who work
Right.
how they're going to do in this upcoming session here when they're have to come with hat in hand, like, "Hey, please bring your buyer over here."
Yeah.
Yeah. So cool. All right, you guys. Well, again, thank you for your thoughts and time today. Very much appreciate it. And we will I have to work with Michelle to come up with the next topic. That was we had 4 panels set up, and that was our last one on this series. So be looking at your notices, and we will be, keep trying to do this on some sort of regular basis, if not monthly, every other month, for relevant topics. And thank you for sharing all your knowledge, you guys. And we'll leave everyone to the rest of their day. So
Awesome. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
guys.
Matt.
Thanks all.